My mom called me an embarrassment because I took an honest factory job. My new story is ready. Enjoy listening.
My mother excluded me from Mother's Day dinner by text message, and my siblings responded with emojis, champagne emojis, like it was a celebration. I'm Jocelyn, and I need to tell you this story because I've held it in for long enough, and it's starting to rot. The text came on May 8th. I was sitting in my Subaru in the Cascade Packaging Solutions parking lot in Roanoke, Virginia, eating a granola bar that tasted like cardboard because I'd left the box open on my counter for a week. My shift started in 14 minutes. The group chat lit up. The family group chat that my mother Renata controlled like it was a boardroom. Mother's Day dinner this Sunday. Successful kids only. Reservations at Tuscan Grill. 6 p.m. sharp. Then the names. Donovan, Phoebe, Todd. That's Phoebe's husband. He got an invite before I did, and that man once asked me if Virginia was near Philadelphia. But sure, successful. My name wasn't there. My brother Donovan, 33, licensed real estate agent, hasn't closed a deal since the summer, responded with 3 champagne emojis. Phoebe, my sister, sent a gif of someone waving goodbye. A cartoon wave, like a joke, like I was the joke. I scrolled up. My hands were doing that thing where they go cold from the center out, like all the heat in your body just decides to leave. And I saw it. Renata had been texting the group for 3 days before that. Planning the restaurant, picking the time, asking about allergies. 3 days of planning, and everyone knew I wasn't included. And nobody said a word. Not Donovan, who I used to drive to baseball practice. Not Phoebe, who borrowed my prom dress because she spilled canola oil on hers 2 hours before her own prom. Nobody. His name is Donovan, by the way. I'll use real names because honestly, at this point, I don't care who reads this. Now let me back up, because the dinner wasn't the beginning. The beginning was 2 years before that when I dropped out of James Madison University after my sophomore year. I couldn't afford tuition. My mother had co-signed one loan, complained about it every Thanksgiving for 2 straight years, then refused to co-sign the next one. She said I should have picked business instead of sociology. Sociology, she said, like the word was something she scraped off her shoe. So I came home, applied everywhere, got hired at Cascade Packaging, quality inspector on the second shift, $19.40 an hour. Not glamorous. Not the kind of job you post on LinkedIn with a paragraph about new chapters. But it was honest, it was steady, and it paid for my apartment and my car insurance and the off-brand cereal I ate too much of. When I told my mother, the phone went so quiet I thought the call dropped. Then she said, "You're an embarrassment to this family." Not "I'm disappointed." Not "I wish you'd try harder." An embarrassment. Like I was a stain on a tablecloth she was trying to present to guests. I said something back. I don't even remember what. Something small and pathetic, probably an apology, because that's what I did back then. I apologized for existing in a way she found inconvenient. After that, the ranking became official. Donovan was the golden boy. Real estate license, big talk about million-dollar listings, always wearing a blazer even to family barbecues. The fact that he owed my mother $23,000 in loans that were never getting paid back didn't matter. He had a title. Phoebe was the star. Pharmaceutical sales rep, married to Todd Niles, HVAC contractor, house in Glen Allen with a 2-car garage. The fact that Todd decided how every dollar in that house got spent and Phoebe couldn't buy a coffee without checking with him first, that didn't matter either. She had the look, the optics. And me? I had a factory badge and a Subaru with a dent on the rear bumper from a runaway shopping cart in the Food Lion parking lot. My mother told the extended family I was taking a gap year to find myself. I found out about that lie from my cousin Andrea at a cookout in August. Andrea hugged me and said something about soul-searching, and I stood there holding a paper plate of potato salad, trying to figure out what planet I was on. She erased me. She just wrote a different story and handed it out. I sat in my car that night in the Cascade lot until the windows fogged up and I couldn't see the parking lot lights anymore. I didn't cry. I just went somewhere inside myself where it was very quiet and very far away. Wait, before I keep going, if you're listening to this and it's hitting close to home, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single one. It means more than you know, okay? So, the Mother's Day dinner happened without me, obviously. I know because Donovan posted photos. He posts everything. This man photographs his lunch like he's documenting evidence for a trial. Prime rib, white tablecloth, candles. My mother in the center of the frame, beaming. Phoebe on her left, Donovan on her right. Todd at the end, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, which, fair, that might be the one thing Todd and I have in common. Phoebe's Instagram story was the one that really got me. A boomerang of her raising a wine glass with the caption, "Only the best for the best mom." I watched it loop 11 times. I counted. You know what's funny? Not funny, haha, funny, I might lose my mind. The rankings weren't new. They'd been happening since I was a kid. When Donovan passed his real estate exam, Renata threw a dinner. When Phoebe landed the pharma gig, Renata bought her pearl earrings. I remember because Phoebe showed them to me on FaceTime, and I said they were beautiful, and I meant it. When I called Renata to tell her I got hired at Cascade, she said one word, okay? And then asked if I'd talked to Donovan recently, because he'd seemed down. Okay, that was it. Not even an okay, good. Just okay with the period you could hear. A week after Mother's Day, I called her. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I just said the right words in the right order, she'd hear me. I rehearsed it in my bathroom mirror like a lunatic, told my reflection I deserved basic respect. My reflection looked skeptical but supportive. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. I told her the group chat had hurt me, that I just wanted to understand why I wasn't included. And she said, "I'm not going to pretend I'm proud of you stacking boxes for $13 an hour. When you get serious about your life, we'll talk." $13 an hour. I made $19.40. She didn't even know my wage. She had never once asked me what I actually did. Couldn't be bothered to insult me with an accurate number. That's the part that stuck. Not the cruelty, but the laziness of it. She didn't care enough to even get the put down right. I hung up and reorganized every drawer in my kitchen. Forks, knives, spatulas, the weird drawer with the twist ties and dead batteries, all of it took me an hour and a half. My hands needed something to do that wasn't dialing her number again. Donovan called me that weekend. Casual, breezy, like nothing happened. He told me not to take it personally, that Mom was just stressed about money, which was rich, and I mean that literally, coming from the man who'd borrowed $23,000 from her over the past 4 years and repaid exactly none of it. But sure, she was stressed about money. My honest job was the financial problem, not the grown son treating her checking account like an ATM with a guilt trip attached. Here's the thing I learned later from my cousin Andrea again, because Andrea was basically my family's accidental news service. Renata had told the whole extended family that I'd moved to Oregon. She told them I was working at some tech company out west and doing great. She invented an entire relocation for me. I was living 20 minutes outside Roanoke, going to the same Food Lion, and my mother had me in Portland working in tech. I don't even know what people do in tech. I inspect packaging seals for a living. But apparently in Renata's version, I was thriving in Silicon Forest or wherever, and everything was fine, and she definitely had 3 successful children. Thank you very much. The woman didn't just exclude me. She replaced me with a fictional character who had a better resume. Phoebe's birthday was in September. I went. I know. But she was still my sister, and some stupid, stubborn part of me kept thinking if I just showed up enough, if I was just present enough, something would shift. I bought her a cashmere scarf. Spent $94 on it, which was not a casual purchase on my budget. I wrapped it in actual tissue paper. I drove an hour and 40 minutes to Glen Allen. The party was at Phoebe and Todd's house. White siding, landscaped bushes, a doorbell that played a little melody. 20-some people in the backyard. I said hello to cousins I hadn't seen in months. One of them squinted at me and said something about Oregon, and I just smiled and said I was still around. Phoebe opened gifts after dinner. She got to mine, pulled out the scarf, held it up and said, in front of everyone, with a grin like she was doing a bit, "Aw, factory overtime money?" Todd snorted. Actually snorted through his nose, like a man who installs ductwork for a living and somehow thinks that's more dignified than what I do. My mother was standing 6 feet away holding a glass of white wine. She didn't say a word, didn't correct them, didn't even blink, just took a sip. The plate I'd been holding went down on Todd's new patio table, the one he'd spent 20 minutes telling everyone about, and I walked through the house and out the front door. Nobody followed me. I sat in my Subaru for a few minutes and watched the porch light through the windshield. Then I drove home. The following Tuesday, I changed my phone number. Didn't announce it, didn't send a group text or a dramatic email. Just went to the Verizon store on Hirschberger Road and got a new SIM card. $35. Then I deleted Facebook. Didn't deactivate. Deleted. Then, when my lease came up the next month, I moved to an apartment on the other side of Roanoke. Didn't forward the address. I didn't disappear in a blaze of anything. I just stopped being available to people who never noticed I was there in the first place. This part is hard to talk about. Give me a second, okay. 3 weeks into the silence, I fell apart. I called in sick on a Thursday. Told my supervisor I had a stomach bug. I didn't have a stomach bug. I had a hole inside me that felt like it went all the way through. Like you could drop a penny in my chest and hear it hit the floor. I lay on my couch in sweatpants I'd been wearing for 2 days, ate dry cereal out of the box, some store-brand version of Cheerios that tasted like compressed air. I watched a cooking competition show for 9 hours. 9. I couldn't tell you a single thing anyone made. At one point, I picked up the phone, dialed my mother's number from memory, still knew it by heart. Isn't that something? Let it ring twice and hung up. I don't know what I would have said if she answered. Probably nothing useful. Probably something pathetic and strangled, and she would have said something that made me feel worse, and I would have been right back at zero. So maybe it's a mercy she didn't pick up. Or maybe she did, and I hung up too fast. I'll never know. That week, a woman named Tanya Briggs saved me without trying to. Tanya was a senior line operator at Cascade, 54, divorced, 2 grown sons, voice like she'd been smoking and drinking black coffee since before I was born, though she actually did neither. She'd been at the plant for 19 years. She had opinions about everything and shared them whether you asked or not. She noticed I was off. Didn't say anything about it. Just left a Tupperware container of chicken soup on my workstation with a Post-it note telling me to microwave it for 2 minutes and not to overcook it because she wasn't making more. I ate that soup in the break room at 10:30 at night and cried into it a little, salty both ways. Tanya walked by, saw me, patted my shoulder once, and kept walking. Didn't ask, didn't push, just was there. That's what a mother should feel like. Not a performance review. About a year and a half went by. I want to be clear about that. Not a week, not a dramatic montage. Real months of getting up, going to work, coming home, going to sleep, and doing it again. Somewhere in that stretch, things shifted. Not like a light switch, more like when your eyes adjust in a dark room and you start seeing the shapes of furniture. I got promoted to shift supervisor, $24.75 an hour. I trained new hires. I learned how to run a production report. I started going to the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not because I was on some self-improvement crusade or whatever people say, but because I needed somewhere to put all that energy that used to go into checking my old phone for messages from people who never sent them. Sundays, I drove to Tanya's house for dinner. She made pot roast with carrots that fell apart when you looked at them. Her sons came sometimes, big, loud guys who argued about football and included me in the argument like I'd always been there. Nobody asked about my mother. Nobody asked why a 29-year-old woman was spending every Sunday at her co-worker's dinner table instead of with her own family. They just passed me the mashed potatoes and told me to try the cornbread. I wasn't happy, but I was steady. And steady was a lot more than I'd had in a long time. Then, one afternoon in March, my phone rang. Unknown number, 828 area code. I almost didn't pick up. I'd gotten careful about unknown numbers. Figured Renata might try calling from someone else's phone, but something made me answer. Jocelyn, baby, is that you? It was my grandmother. Yelena Volkov, my father's mother, 81 years old, living alone in a little ranch house in Burnsville, North Carolina. I hadn't talked to her in over a year, not because I didn't want to, but because when I changed my number, I hadn't thought about who else I was cutting off. That's the thing about disappearing. You don't just lose the people who hurt you, you lose some of the people who didn't. Yelena had tracked me down through the credit union. I was still listed as a beneficiary on an old savings account my father set up before he died. I was 9 when that happened, a whole different kind of loss that I don't have the energy to unpack right now. The credit union had my updated phone number because I'd called them about a statement. Yelena called the branch, explained she was trying to reach her granddaughter, and someone gave her my number. Small town banking. Sometimes the lack of corporate protocol works in your favor. She told me she'd been trying to find me for 6 months, that my mother had told everyone I moved to Oregon. Again with Oregon. Renata didn't even update the lie. I told her I was in Roanoke, that I never left Virginia, and my grandmother went quiet for a second and then said 2 words, "that woman," in a voice that carried about 40 years of knowing exactly who Renata was. This has nothing to do with the story, but Yelena had a cat, this enormous orange cat named Commissar, which is Russian for commissar, 15 pounds minimum. He sat on my lap the entire first weekend I visited her in Burnsville and shed on my one good pair of black pants so thoroughly I looked like I was wearing an Angora sweater from the waist down. I'm sorry. That has nothing to do with anything, but I think about that cat more than I probably should. Yelena's house smelled like black tea and wool and something I couldn't name at first, and then I realized it smelled like my father, or what I remembered of him. Same soap, maybe. Same something. We sat on her front porch that Saturday evening. The mountains were doing that blue-purple thing they do at dusk around Burnsville. Yelena had a cup of tea. I had a glass of water. Commissar was between us, purring like a small tractor engine. "Your mother," Yelena said, "has always measured people like produce. If you don't look right on the outside, she puts you back." She took a sip of tea and stared at the tree line. Then she told me my father would be ashamed of how Renata treated me. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you'd say the sky is blue. I didn't say anything. I just sat there in the cooling air and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in over a year, like someone was on my side. Not because I earned it, not because I performed well, just because I was there, and that was enough. Yelena mentioned, almost in passing, that Donovan had called her the month before asking to borrow money. She said no. She told me he spent more than he earned and always had, and that Renata fed the habit. $23,000. Yelena knew the exact number because Donovan had told her, trying to make it sound small. People like Donovan always do, she said. They think if they say it fast enough, it doesn't count. Over the next 8 months, I drove to Burnsville every other weekend, 4 hours each way. My Subaru's odometer clicked past 140,000 miles and made a sound I chose to interpret as enthusiasm rather than a cry for help. Yelena had congestive heart failure. We didn't talk about it directly. She'd mention doctor appointments the way you mention a trip to the post office, and I'd drive her, and we'd sit in the waiting room at Mission Hospital in Asheville, flipping through magazines from 2019 like time travelers. She'd point at recipes in old issues of Southern Living and say that one used too much butter, even for her. And she was Russian. What we talked about was everything else. My father, his name was Andrei, and he died of a stroke when I was 9. Yelena told me stories I'd never heard. How he once drove 14 hours from Burnsville to Atlantic City to surprise my mother for her birthday, showed up at the hotel with grocery store roses and a Hershey bar, and Renata said he couldn't find a florist. Yelena laughed when she told that one, but her eyes didn't. We talked about the factory. She wanted to know every detail. What the machines sounded like, what I inspected, who my favorite co-workers were. She said working with your hands was honest, and anyone who looked down on it had never gone a day without something they took for granted. She said this while peeling potatoes with a paring knife that had to be older than me. Commissar sat on the kitchen counter watching her like a quality control supervisor, which, fair, that was my job too. We had that in common, Commissar and me. Those weekends were the best 8 months of my adult life. And then they ended. Yelena died on a Tuesday in October. The credit union called me. I was still listed as her emergency contact. I drove to Burnsville in the rain, sat in her driveway for 20 minutes with the engine running. The house looked the same. The porch light was on, which meant it had been on since the last time she'd gone to bed and never turned it off. That detail nearly broke me in half. I found Commissar inside, sitting on the kitchen table next to an empty teacup. He meowed once. I fed him, cleaned his litter box, and then sat on Yelena's couch and stared at the wall for a long time. A week later, Greg Heineman called, a state lawyer, Asheville office, polite, careful, the kind of voice that sounds like it's wearing a tie. He told me Yelena had updated her will 11 months before her death. She left everything to me, everything. The house, appraised at $142,000, her credit union savings, $87,400, a handwritten letter, and Commissar, who was technically also in the will because Yelena was that kind of thorough. Nothing to Renata, nothing to Donovan, nothing to Phoebe. I sat on my apartment floor with the phone pressed to my ear and couldn't speak for so long that Heinemann asked if I was still there. I told him I was. That was all I could manage. Now here's where it gets ugly, because nothing in my family stays simple. Within a week, Renata found out. Donovan, and this is peak Donovan, had been searching Yancey County property records online, hoping his name was on something. When he saw the transfer to me, he called Renata so fast you'd think his phone was on fire. And Renata went volcanic. She called my old number, disconnected. She called Cascade Packaging and asked for me by name. The receptionist patched it through. I saw Henrico County on the caller ID and let it ring. She called back 4 times. I let it ring 4 times. On the 5th, my supervisor looked at me and told me to either handle it or turn my phone off. I turned my phone off. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter. Renata had hired a lawyer. She was contesting the will, claiming Yelena was not of sound mind at the time of signing. Not of sound mind. This was a woman who, 6 months before she died, organized her entire spice cabinet alphabetically, translated a letter from Russian for her neighbor, and beat me at Scrabble using the word quixotic. But sure, Renata, not of sound mind. The filing included a statement from Donovan claiming he had visited Yelena regularly and observed signs of confusion. I read that sentence 3 times. Donovan hadn't visited Yelena in 4 years. The last time he went to Burnsville, he stayed 40 minutes, asked her for $2,000, and left when she said no. Yelena told me this herself. She'd remembered the exact amount and the exact length of the visit because, again, she was the furthest thing from confused. I needed a lawyer. I called 3 firms in the Roanoke area. Retainers started at $4,000. I had $2,100 in my checking account and a savings account with $740 that I called my If My Subaru Dies fund. I could not afford to defend an inheritance from a dead woman's will against a living woman with a better credit card. I sat in my car in the Walmart parking lot on Town Square Boulevard and cried so hard I gave myself a headache. Then I bought Advil and a frozen pizza because that's what grief and financial panic look like at 29. Not dramatic, just sad and hungry. I almost gave up. I want to be honest about that because I think people skip over that part when they tell stories like this. They jump from the problem to the solution like there's a bridge between them. There isn't. There's a gap, and you stand at the edge of it and stare down, and you think about walking away from the whole thing. I called Tanya at 11 o'clock at night on a Wednesday. She picked up on the second ring, which means she was either awake or sleeps with her phone on her pillow. And knowing Tanya, it could be either. I told her I was thinking about signing everything over, all of it. The house, the money, just letting Renata have it. I said I couldn't afford to fight her, didn't have the energy, and maybe Yelena would understand. Tanya didn't give me advice. She didn't say, don't you dare, or you have to fight. She just told me to sleep on it, not sign anything that night, and call her in the morning. I didn't sleep. I alphabetized my entire bookshelf, all 31 books, including a copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting that I'd bought at a yard sale by accident and never returned because I felt too awkward. It was filed under W by 3 in the morning, right between a Stephen King novel and a cookbook I'd never opened. Productive evening. 2 days later, things got worse, because of course they did. Renata somehow got Tanya's name. I think she called Cascade's main line and asked the receptionist who my supervisor was, and the receptionist gave her Tanya's name instead because Tanya had covered a supervisor shift that week. Small mistake, enormous consequences. Renata called Tanya at home, told her that I was mentally unstable and had manipulated a dying old woman into changing her will. She said I had a history of erratic behavior. She said she was worried about me. She used her concerned mother voice, the one she deploys when she wants people to think she's the reasonable one. Tanya listened to the whole thing, said she'd heard enough, and hung up. But when Tanya told me about the call, I felt something crack in my chest that had nothing to do with Renata insulting me and everything to do with Renata dragging someone I cared about into this swamp. Tanya didn't sign up for my family's dysfunction. She signed up to make packaging materials and eat pot roast on Sundays, and now my mother was calling her at home and lying about me. I started apologizing. Tanya cut me off. "Girl," she said, "my ex-husband once called my boss to tell him I was hiding assets during the divorce. Your mother is an amateur. Now sit down and eat this sandwich." She brought a folder to work the next day. Her ex-husband's brother, a man named Cliff, worked as a paralegal at a firm in Salem. He owed Tanya a favor. She didn't elaborate on why, just said it involved a boat and a very bad Thanksgiving. And he'd agreed to help me prepare the legal response to the will contest under the supervising attorney's name. Filing cost, $600. Not $4,000, $600. I could do $600. That weekend, I drove to Burnsville to start cleaning out Yelena's house. Commissar was still there. Yelena's neighbor, Mrs. Fenton, had been feeding him. He greeted me at the door like I was 20 minutes late for an appointment, which honestly tracked. In the hall closet, behind a stack of wool blankets that smelled like mothballs and history, I found a shoebox, brown cardboard. Buster Brown printed on the side. I didn't even know that brand still existed. Inside, 14 handwritten letters, all addressed to me. Some had been mailed over the years and returned. Renata's address, where I'd lived before. Some were never sent. They spanned 3 years. And underneath the letters, a single sheet of paper addressed to Greg Heineman, dated 6 months before Yelena's death. I read it standing in the hallway with Commissar winding between my ankles. To whom it may concern, I, Yelena Volkov, am writing this letter of my own free will and in full possession of my faculties. My daughter-in-law, Renata Volkov, has not visited me in 9 years. My grandson, Donovan, has not visited in 4 years, and his last visit was to request money. My granddaughter, Phoebe, has not visited or called in 6 years. My granddaughter, Jocelyn, is the only member of this family who has come to see me, cared for me, and treated me with love and dignity. This will reflect that. Yelena wrote in this tiny, precise cursive that looked like it came out of a 1940s Soviet penmanship class. Every single letter was dated, signed, and, I swear, on everything. She noted the weather in the margin. October 4th, clear, 58 degrees. January 12th, freezing rain, Commissar will not go outside. She documented her own lucidity like she knew someone would try to question it someday. I sat on the hallway floor with the shoebox in my lap and cried. Not the Walmart parking lot kind of crying, the kind where you feel like you're being held by someone who isn't there anymore. She'd protected me from beyond the grave. That woman thought of everything. She even noted the weather. The will contest lasted 3 months. It felt like 3 decades, but the calendar says 3 months, so I'll trust the calendar. Cliff the paralegal, God bless that man and whatever happened on that Thanksgiving boat, prepared everything under the attorney's direction. Yelena's handwritten letter to Heineman, her medical records from Mission Hospital, which showed cognitive assessments in normal range through her last appointment 8 weeks before she died. The 14 letters all dated and signed, and the credit union records showing that I was her only regular visitor listed in their check-in system. Yelena had been signing a visitor log every time I came to the credit union branch with her. She'd written my name next to hers on the log, every single time. Now I know some of you are thinking I should feel bad about what happened next. Maybe, but I'm telling you what happened, not what I should feel. Heineman presented everything to Renata's attorney. Renata's attorney, a man named Dave Linden from a strip mall office in Short Pump, looked at the letter, looked at the medical records, looked at the visitor logs, and called Renata. He advised her to drop the case. Renata refused. She spent another $4,200 on a motion that was, from what Cliff told me, legally creative in the way that losing lottery tickets are creatively financial investments. The motion argued that I had unduly influenced Yelena through frequent visitation. Let me say that again. Her legal argument was that I visited my grandmother too much, that loving someone was evidence of manipulation, that showing up was suspicious. The judge didn't agree. Dave Linden withdrew from the case a week before the hearing. which in legal terms is the equivalent of your Uber driver pulling over and saying you should probably walk from here. Contest dismissed. The house and the savings were mine. Total cost to Renata, $11,500. For nothing, for less than nothing. Because that money didn't just vanish, it bought her a front row seat to her own humiliation. And then the thread started pulling apart. Donovan's credit card situation had been getting worse the whole time. 3 cards maxed, a personal loan from some online lender with an interest rate that should have been illegal. He'd been managing it by borrowing from Renata every few months, but Renata had just spent $11,500 on a lawsuit she lost. When Donovan called asking for $2,000 in December, she told him she didn't have it. First time she'd ever said no to him. He stopped calling. Just like that, her golden boy, her champion, her successful kid, gone the moment the ATM shut off. He didn't check on her during the holidays, didn't even text on Christmas. I know this because Heinemann told me later. Renata had mentioned it to him during one of her calls to his office, which she'd started making for reasons that had nothing to do with legal matters. Phoebe's situation crumbled on a parallel track. Todd refused to help Renata with the legal bills. Phoebe asked him. He said no, not let me think about it, not maybe next month. Just no, and then he went to the garage to do whatever Todd does in the garage, which based on the amount of time he spends there is either building a spaceship or avoiding his wife. Their marriage, which was already held together with duct tape and mutual avoidance, cracked wider. Phoebe stopped visiting Renata because every visit turned into a conversation about money and guilt, and Phoebe couldn't handle either one without Todd's permission. Within 4 months of the will contest failing, both of Renata's successful children had ghosted her. The woman who texted Mother's Day dinner and successful kids only now spent her Sunday evenings alone in a house in Henrico County with a leased Lexus in the driveway and nobody to drive to. Then Greg Heinemann called me. His voice sounded different than I'd ever heard it, unsteady, like he was holding the phone too tight. He told me this wasn't a legal call. He said my mother had come to his office the day before. She sat in his waiting room for an hour without an appointment. When he came out, she asked him to call me. She said, I don't know how to reach her. She changed everything. I don't have her number. I don't have her address. I don't even know what she looks like anymore. Heinemann's voice cracked. He told me he'd been doing estate law for 22 years, and this was the saddest case he'd ever handled. He wasn't telling me what to do, but she'd asked him to call. I held the phone against my ear and stared out my kitchen window at the parking lot of my apartment complex. There was a kid riding a bicycle in circles around a speed bump. I watched him go around 4 times. I told him I appreciated the call. I really did. Long pause. But I'm not going to come. Not angry. Not cold. I didn't slam the phone or make a speech. I just said it the way you say something you've known for a long time but haven't said out loud yet. Like stating your name. Like stating a fact about the weather. He said he understood. He wished me well. And that was it. I know some of you think I should have gone. I've thought about it 100 times. Maybe a better person would have. But that day, standing in my kitchen, I chose myself. For the first time in my life, I chose myself over her approval. And it didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like setting down something so heavy I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. It's a Sunday. I'm at Tanya's house. Pot roast, carrots that fall apart on contact. Her sons arguing about football and including me in the argument like I've always been there. Someone passes me the bread basket without being asked. It's warm. The table is loud. And that's enough. My mother sent me a card for my 30th birthday. No return address, just a Henrico County postmark. I looked at it for a while. Then I set it on the counter and went back to folding laundry. Some things don't need an answer. Someone left a comment on one of my last videos that said these stories reminded them they weren't alone. That one sentence stayed with me for days. More stories are right on your screen. Click one. I'll see you there.